Welcome. Hey, I'm back in the saddle. I was in Boston, Massachusetts last week. I even made my way to Salem, Massachusetts, which was really interesting. Welcome. It is Mysterious Forces Live. It is Friday, May 3rd, 2019. Welcome. Feels good to be back in the saddle. Had a little bit of a hiatus. I didn't have any good pre-recorded material to put up during my absence in Boston. So we just kind of blew through last weekend, but we're back. And wow, have you tuned in for a great show? I'm super, super excited about tonight's guest. His name is Aron Ra. And I thought I was going to talk a little bit since I wasn't on last weekend and just kind of shoot the shit with everyone. But I'm so excited about this guest, and I have a feeling that we have so much to talk about that I'm just going to jump straight into it because this is going to be jam-packed. Tonight's guest is Aron Ra. He is, in my opinion, an intellectual powerhouse. He is an atheist activist. He has a podcast called the Ra Men Podcast, which is RA-MEN podcast. He's the former president of the Atheist Alliance of America. He hails from Dallas, Texas. In 2017, he ran for the Texas State Senate. And he's written a book called The Foundational Falsehoods of Creationism. And he has lots of other credits and accomplishments, but I don't want to go down that list. You can look him up, and I'm sure that by the time this episode is over, you'll be wanting to find out more about him. So without any further ado, Aron Ra, thank you so much for being on Mysterious Forces Live.
Thank you for the invitation. Happy to be here. The pleasure is mine. I want to frame this a little bit. We were careful. We had like 10 minutes to kill before we went on the air. And we were careful not to talk about too much because we like spontaneous conversations here. Nothing is set up. So I had to kind of bite my tongue. And I've watched a lot of atheist videos on YouTube over the course of the last 2.5 weeks. And I had originally, Aron, found your videos, and that's kind of what started leading me down the rabbit hole. And I'd like to frame for the audience and for Aron just my perspective and where I'm coming from. Not so much that I would attempt to convince Aron of anything or debate my point of view with him. And the reason that I will not debate him is, just let me frame this up. I would have to say, and I've given a lot of thought to this, I would have to say that if we took kind of like my perception of the universe and my experiences, I would have to ration it out to I'm 75% atheist in the sense that I believe there is a 75% chance that Aron's point of view is completely correct, that there is nothing supernatural, that when we die, when the synapses stop firing, when our heart stops pumping blood, we're dead, we're gone, that's it, show's over, lights out, okay? I believe that that's 75% chance that that's true. I am not a theist in any way. I never have been. As a member of the LGBT community, I've taken great offense to organized Christianity and other religions that rail against the LGBTQ community. So I have had, in my own mind, an adversarial kind of position with them. And so that part of atheism really appeals to me, and I really agree with it. And I like what they're doing. And I like how that they're as equally aggressive in pushing back against theocracy and overuse of religion, just as aggressively as the Christians have done to introduce religion into politics and just the fabric of our society, and to kind of weave this superstitious belief into the fabric of our culture. And so there's 25% of me that the 25% that I kind of reserve back for what I
maybe we'll call the woo. It's not based on anyone else's teachings. It's not based on a story I read, but only based on my own personal experiences. And that 25% of that kind of agnostic area for me, I cannot defend with logic and reason. It is literally, by definition, indefensible. To be intellectually honest, I have to admit, I have no choice but to admit that I cannot demonstrate the things I believe. I cannot prove them. And the things that I kind of hold on to cannot be defended with logic and reason. That battle can't be won, and I wouldn't even try. So I wrestle with kind of these direct experiences that I've had versus, just kind of like swallowing someone else's teachings. That's not the case. So even though I believe most likely that atheism, the tenets of atheism, if there are such a thing, is true and accurate. But I also, I guess I can't let go of that 25% of agnosticism because of my direct experiences. And I have a hard time wrestling with the idea of denying what I saw, what I heard, what I experienced directly versus the concept of logic and reason. And so that's a battle within me. So I'm just going to admit that up front. I can't defend it. I can't prove it. There's no proof. That's over. There is no debate. That 25%, I can't defend it, nor would I try. So that's where I'm coming from. And I feel like I've talked way too much in just framing that. But I wanted Aron and the audience to know where I'm coming from. And I really want this to be an introduction. If you have never really listened to an atheist, if you've never closely considered the atheist point of view, this is why I brought him on. I had a couple of people on the show early on in the run, and I felt guilty for having those people on because I felt like I had perpetuated some woo-woo bullshit by having them on and giving these people a platform. And this is, if I can use that phraseology, kind of an atonement for me for bringing some of that on the show. And I thought one of the best ways to balance that out is to bring someone on like Aron who will completely deny anything supernatural. And I feel like I owe that to the audience. So that's the main reason why I invite him here. I'm trying to balance out the show and have some atonement for bringing on some woo-woo bullshit and providing a different perspective. And I am going to very much look at the chat room tonight. And if you have questions for Aron, I'm going to go through and read questions and read them to him. So if you're out there, I'll be looking at questions later. So, Aron, after me having talked so much, can you just give us kind of the basic gist of Atheism 101, the perspective that you have, and just kind of like lay that out?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'm noticing the screen isn't shifting when I speak versus when you speak, so you might want to have to click my icon one more time because it's still staying on you. But one of the I wanted to start with that my background was not too terribly dissimilar from yours. I walked out of Christianity directly into neo-paganism. So I mean, I was doing the transcendental meditation and with a sincere belief that there was scientific evidence for a number of psionic abilities, you know, and that astral projection was the best way to directly experience, you know, the paranormal and so forth. And I thought that there was, and a lot of people did, you know, in my generation, as you remember, I mean, everybody believed, even the skeptics believed that people had ESP, or that there was a potential there for ESP and telekinesis and everything. I mean, that's why people could do it in Star Wars and people could do that sort of thing in Star Trek. I mean, so even the intellectuals seemed to believe that there was something to that. And lo and behold, of course, there's not. And for me, the issue is not reversing the burden of proof, which is actually a logical fallacy. It is trying to show whether there is any substance. I think the concept is called a proof of concept, you know, where you need to show whether there's any truth to that. And at once upon a time, I remember when I was 19 years old, I believed everything required of the Ghostbusters. I mean, when you have that scene where Janine is interviewing Winston Zeddemore, do you believe in spirit photography, astral projection, Loch Ness Monster, and the theory of Atlantis, and all this other stuff? When I was 19, I believed all of that. And I was proud that I believed all of that. I'm hugely embarrassed about it now because I thought of myself at that time as being, you know, I don't remember ever using the word skeptic, but I thought I was being analytical. I thought I was truly only believing in these things, not out of faith, which to me is make-believe, is causing yourself to believe something that isn't true, forcing yourself to believe it. That wasn't what I was doing. I had been misled by the media of the day. You know, we had an awful lot of newspapers and TV shows and everything purporting to be scientific. These were supposedly documentaries. And we thought, well, it must be vetted if it's on TV, right? It's like that scene out of Wag the Dog. You know, I know it's real. I saw it on TV.
Right.
Very much different thing. So I started finding out that there was a lot of the TV shows that I was trusting and a lot of the books that I was reading that were actually deceiving me, that didn't have any substance to them at all. I didn't have to find proof that anything was necessarily wrong, although I did find a lot of that too. And my greatest evidence, the best evidence that I ever had for belief in life force, I found out was actually the thing that I based my entire religious perspective on, turned out to be a deliberate fraud.
Okay.
But with most other things, it's just that there wasn't any truth to it. There was no substance to it. There's no mechanism. There's no potential theory. There's no proof of concept. And I had profound personal experiences that I remember as, you know, as a neo-pagan occultist. You know, I was experimenting with astral projection. I mean, how can you get better than that?
Right. And I've done the same thing. So you're right. You and I did tread a very similar path, but continue, please.
Yeah. So the problem that I had was realizing that at some point I came to this very painful realization that all of those things didn't really happen because they couldn't happen. They couldn't have happened. There was no way, there was no mechanism for this. There was no reality to it. And even with the shared experience that I had, because there would be a couple of times that there were other people with me and we shared this thing together. And so if we have two different people experiencing the same thing, that's got to be legitimate, right? And through the power of the internet, I managed to reconnect with both of those people that I knew so long ago. And I was expecting to have a very painful conversation where I have to tell them that thing that you and I experienced together, you know, whether it was astral projection, whether it was the moment when the room was flooded with gargoyles and the temperature dropped 10 degrees immediately and all of that kind of crap. And we remember this, the ordeal that we went through with no drugs involved, straight up sober. You'd be amazed what you can get your mind to accept if you just psych yourself out for it. And it was, as a neo-pagan occultist, I didn't realize that I was actually using faith then. I didn't use it as a Christian, but I did as a pagan because I didn't realize what faith was. I didn't realize that you know, whenever they tell you that you can see auras, if you could just condition your eyes to see just beyond what your eyes can see, well, that means you're making stuff up. You know, you are conditioning yourself to make things up that aren't really true or there. So I thought I was going to have this painful conversation where I have to tell those people that I no longer believe that happened. But in both of those instances where I found where I connected with those other people again, it turned out they didn't remember that shared experience at all. Not that they remembered it differently. They didn't remember it at all. It never happened for them in either case, which I found mystifying. And so both of those people where they were every bit as into this kind of spiritualism as I was when we were kids, when we were teenagers, both of them are hardcore rationalists now with no belief in the supernatural whatsoever. And I know that you had expressed at some point that, you know, you had a belief in Bigfoot and a few other things. I mean, I did too. I mean, I believed in all this kind of stuff. But regarding Bigfoot, there is a funny story that I put up on video a number of times that I believed Bigfoot right up until I was him.
Okay.
I was mistaken for Bigfoot by a number of different people on a highway in New Mexico, going into Arizona. And I came back through town, and I heard the stories about all these people witnessing this, and realized, of course, that and I'm not going to get into the story right now, but I realized, of course, they're talking about me.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no other option.
No.
And I just stopped believing in Bigfoot at that point.
Right. One of the big questions I have, and trust me, I've actually been kind of perseverating on this whole issue for 2.5 weeks. I think because it's affecting me personally, and I think this is probably the beginning, the end of me holding on to supernatural stuff. I can't say that right now for sure, but I have to be suspicious of that because I'm thinking about this stuff for a reason. And I'm wondering if we have a tendency as human beings to want to find this pattern, to want to connect with this something greater than ourselves, just out of some sheer biological part of ourselves that wants to deny our mortality, that we are so afraid of the fact that we are going to die and that's it, and that we will cease to exist. Do you think that these are just complicated mechanisms, some kind of psychological self-defense?
I never had the fear of death. As a matter of fact, I can remember being 12 years old and praying to God when I tried to read the Bible, and I found the Bible to be just absolute trash. I mean, I couldn't get out. Could not get through Genesis before I realized everything that I'd been told about the Bible is wrong. That, that this is not the word of the supreme being. These are the words of ignorant primitives pretending to speak for God, if at best. And they weren't even really pretending to speak for God, except for the prophets, of course. We hadn't even gotten into the prophets in Genesis. But I remember chucking the book across the room in disgust, because God was supposed to be love and God was supposed to be wisdom, and there is not a hint of either one of those things in Genesis, nor really in the whole Bible, except for Ecclesiastes 3:18-21. Other than that, there's nothing. And so I remember I still believed in God, but I had to discard the belief in hell, like, first. And it was at the last moments that I still believed in hell. I offered a prayer to God, saying, "Why can't I just die? Like everything else does, like we're supposed to. Why can't I just come to the end of my life and just blink out of existence, and because that's the way things are supposed to be, so far as I could tell." Mm-hmm. That I was demanding that God do one of two things. He either had to come up with some explanation for why he's doing all of this ridiculous crap in Genesis. I mean, why would you? None of that made any damn sense. Mm-hmm. Or he had to show me that the Bible got him all wrong, that this is just written by human people who have no idea what they're talking about, and so that's why the Bible's wrong about everything. I can honestly say that prayer's been answered, because in the course of the rest of my life, it's been reinforced that it's just the Bible's written by people who have absolutely no idea what they're talking about, and that's why it's wrong about everything.
Right.
But I said the conditions of that was that if God did neither one, then how could I go to heaven and worship him? Worship would mean, at the very least, I would have to show high respect and reverence for an atrocious monster. How is that possible? So right. If he's not going to explain that the Bible got, then don't have me. And as I still believed in hell as a child, I mean, I knew what I was doing to myself. And I even give the prayer the way it is in Matthew 10, I think it is. I can't remember. Where you do pray in the privacy of your own room. You don't pray out in the open where like the hypocrites view you and that sort of thing. But I offered that prayer, damning myself, removing myself from heaven if God didn't if the Bible turned out to be true, that's it. I'm out.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I can't support this crap. And it's funny that I managed to still believe in some concept of Christianity for the next few years until I was at least 19. And what finally did it for me was actually the day that I became reborn in Christ. The day I became reborn in Christ. I mean, I was wandering around for a couple of hours in this euphoric haze, you know, this like delirium, like you're almost like drunk and dizzy and that sort of thing, because I'm just full of the power of Jesus.
A big serotonin rush.
Exactly. And I realized through subsequent studies, I found out years later that it doesn't matter what religion you subscribe to. There's this transcending moment that, you know, where you accept the whatever that religious belief is, and then you experience this similar sort of thing. It happens in Buddhism, it happens in a number of Hindu practices and so forth. So this wasn't really all that mysterious. Well, what got me was the ounce of skepticism that I had in my mind at that time. So when I asked a friend of mine who is now a fundamentalist Baptist preacher, we were just kids then, though. We were in high school. And I asked my friend, how do I know that this is the power of Jesus and that I'm not just deceiving myself? And he grabbed me by both shoulders and with a huge beaming smile and said, just keep telling yourself it's Jesus until you believe it.
Yeah.
Which was so dishonest. I mean, and this guy, the last time I saw him, about 2004, he was still saying the fake it till you make it thing.
Wow.
Where you just keep reinforcing that belief until you fool yourself into thinking it's true. And he doesn't see a problem with that. And indeed, I've run into a lot of different Christians who have a similar sort of opinion. It's like they know. I've heard admissions, and I'm not saying this is a blanket statement against all Christians, because this certainly isn't the case. But there are some who have admitted to me they don't believe what they make believe. They want to believe it. They lie to themselves about it. They try to convince themselves of it, but they know it's not really true. And they get mad at me for ruining the fantasy when I start, you know, trying to call out for evidence or try to get them to think critically. You know, like I mentioned to my friend, well, what if you have all these people representing these different religions? And I named off a bunch of different sects that he's not familiar with. You put them all in the room and they're all saying that they have the absolute truth.
Right.
Logically, only one of them could have the absolute truth. All the others got to be lying. And more rationally is none of them have the absolute truth. Even if one of them has a partial truth, none of them has the absolute truth. And even more likely, none of them have any truth at all. And then I realized, well, what is truth, right? Truth is what we can show to be true. That's it. The truth is what the facts are. So if you can't show that it is true, you don't get to say that it's true. You don't get to call it truth. All these people say, well, I know for a fact there is a God. You don't know that because knowledge is demonstrable and testable. A fact is objectively verifiable, so it's not a fact either. So this is just an empty assertion. You don't get to call absolute truth. You don't get to call truth at all until you can show that it's true. And if you can't show that it's true, all you can say is, I believe. And then I got nothing to say, right? As long as you say, I believe X, don't care. All that matters is when you assert it as fact, when you start stating it as true, when you start telling me the intimate details about who God hates or what God wants to do or for what reason, and you give me all these details about a thing you can't even verify exists in the first place, there's a logical problem there.
Right. I know for myself what I struggled with, and I was like around 11, and I was interested in Christianity. But I know what I was interested in was actually experiencing some sense of community. I came from kind of a disjointed, dysfunctional family, and there was not a lot of cohesion in my family unit. And I think I was looking at outside sources for that. And you see people going to church and hanging out together and having these events, and you're like, wow, you know, like I want to be invited to that party. And but I pretty quickly knew that it wasn't for me. And fast forward, even as I tried to get into Wicca, the one thing I could never do was bring myself to pretend in a personified deity at all. There was just something in me that could never, ever buy the idea of any being at all being conscious, looking down on us, influencing us, or whatever. I have never been able to, I have lacked the ability to ever believe that. So I've never believed that. I've always had some mix of, at least in my head, some jumbled concept of science and the psychic stuff, and that somehow science would one day catch up with our innate psychic abilities, and it would be proven through science. Okay, I guess really, quite honestly, that's what I've been hanging on to. So I still had some thread of science attached to this belief system, and also very much a willingness to accept the fact that I could be completely wrong. And I think it's intellectually dishonest to think that you can't be wrong. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about me or people who believe in something supernatural. So
when we're talking about belief, we do have to have that caveat that whatever you believe can be wrong. It's only what you can show to be true that you can really be sure about.
Correct. Right. That's why I'm saying, I mean, even though I still hold on to some of that, I know that I can't defend it. I know that it's indefensible. And I know that it's illogical and irrational.
I understand your position because I've been there. And I remember having to challenge what I had believed my whole life, realizing that there was no substance to that. And then all of the other things that I had coupled to that, realizing one by one as I examine all these things, as I said, the list that Janine goes over with the, like the theory of Atlantis or the Loch Ness monster or what, all of these things fall away bit by bit until I was left with this one last thing. And I'm like, well, once that was gone, that's it. I had to admit that I was an atheist. I didn't know what atheist was. I've actually been an atheist for 15 years prior to that because I stopped believing in God quite a long time ago. But I still believed in supernatural things, not realizing that all of them were supernatural. I thought there was evidence for some of these things. And then it was quite embarrassing for me to find out that there's no truth to any of it. I based an entire belief system on absolute nonsense and fraud. That was kind of painful.
Did you come to resent that or feel bitter when you looked back on that? But was there...
Yeah, but I didn't waste my life as much as a lot of other people did. So there are people in my family that are absolutely devoted to their religious beliefs. They do the temple thing. They wear the magic underwear. They've got the whole thing going on. And there's no reasoning with these people. I mean, there's no way to distinguish what they believe from what their church believes. Well, what do you think about that? Well, I believe what the Mormon Church believes. Okay, but what do you think about it? There's no independent thought. It's whatever the prophet tells them. That's what they believe. And of course, I'm talking about Mormons, but it doesn't really change with the religion. It really doesn't. If it's an imam, it doesn't matter. If the high priest, doesn't matter. If you're a rabbi, you're gonna buy what you're told. A lot of people don't. And they don't realize that they are disassociating from the religious belief. A lot of people put on a religion like a T-shirt, and they don't have a thought about it. It's like you mentioned the community thing, where they identify whatever's the dominant culture in their area. That's what they identify as there, and they have no idea. There are people in my family that have told me that they are better than me because they're Christian. Those people may have multiple felony convictions. They may be on their fourth marriage. They may have illegitimate children, be drug addicted alcoholics. They've got everything possible wrong with them. They've never cracked open a Bible, don't care what it says, and don't know what a creed is, but they're better than me because they're Christian.
Well, don't you think that's just kind of like some intellectual escapism or even narcissism, to where they have to have someone lower than them to feel better about themselves, or maybe that represents some deeper inner security and they're overcompensating for that insecurity?
I would have to be talking about an individual to make a judgment like that, because I know that when we're talking about religious people, I mean, there's a huge gamut. They don't all fit into one box, because there's a wide range, and I have to constantly remind myself that that this person does not represent all religious people, and neither does that one over there who has a very different perspective.
Right. This stuff is so deep. Have you no, there's just so much, my head is filled with this stuff, and I want to ask this question, and I'm asking this question with all due respect. And I've watched several videos by Seth Andrews, several videos by Matt Dillahunty, and even yourself. And I'm going to be honest, I see it less with you, but sometimes there seems to be a little bit of bitterness that seems to come through. And I'm not trying to get you to talk out of school about your friends and colleagues. I know that those guys are your colleagues and your friends. I'm not asking you to talk about your friends.
Well,
I'm just wondering if in that, there are elements that seem like Christian trolling, which I'm deeply entertained by, and I enjoy seeing it. And I think it's funny that Christians get really afraid of supernatural stuff. Okay. So I kind of get the Christian trolling element of this. And that really hit me. Like, I'd found a couple of your videos, and like the third one I watched was one where you had a cave behind you. And I was like, oh my God, like he's wearing a black suit and a red tie. It's like, he's got the whole, Satan thing going on. Then you had fire behind you while you're talking. I was like, holy shit, this is fantastic. I mean, you just have to know, as I was watching that, I'm like, I love this guy. Like, whatever the fuck he's saying or whatever he's doing, this is amazing. So it was drawing me in. It wasn't repulsing me. But sometimes it seems like maybe there's some bitterness because people wasted time in Christianity or in some kind of religious belief. And like, I just think about the irony of the fact that you guys, and I know you did this tour, you went to Australia, and you're atheists, but you end up having to spend a lot of your time talking about the Bible and quoting the Bible and refuting the arguments of Christians who have very poor arguments. So the very thing that you're against and that you're kind of trying to minimize its impact on our society, you have to spend a lot of time addressing. Do you ever get just sick of all of it? Like, do you have a hobby or something else you do that doesn't involve philosophy where you can just kind of turn this stuff off and let go of that?
Unfortunately, this is my hobby. And well, it's not unfortunate at all. I absolutely love what I do.
Okay.
I
didn't mean to characterize it that way.
Now,
if it came off that way, I didn't mean unfortunately that way. I just like,
a lot of people would say that I exude a bit of bitterness because I don't usually focus just on religious belief. I mean, I focus on a specific form of religious extremism, which would include your flat earth, your geocentrism, creationism, the science denial part.
Right.
If it's just something you believe, something you don't have the ability to defend, I don't really care about that. It's when you make statements that we can prove to be false. And those are the ones I have problems with, and primarily because that's what they're trying to teach in school, and that just irritates the crap out of me. When you have sequestered, impressionable students, and you have the authority of a teacher who is misleading them deliberately, directly, with information that we can prove is wrong, that's immoral.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a huge issue with that. And what the sad thing for me is that I actually have a lot more empathy for the little old ladies in the church pews than I do for the children in the schools. But there's nothing I can do for them. And I remember taking my son, who didn't understand why I was into activism at all. I took my son when he was about 14. We took him to a creationist meeting of sorts where they had some speakers on the stage, and then this huge audience are listening in. And my son understood perfectly well. Once he looked up at the audience and he saw all these little old ladies nodding their heads, in acquiescence to what the liar on stage is telling them, my son was enraged. He was shaking with rage at how they were being victimized by being deceived.
Mm-hmm.
I was enormously proud of him for that.
No,
but I mean, that's what I do. Is, I mean, if you care about understanding and improving your understanding of reality, then you want your information to be accurate. That's when truth actually matters. But accuracy and accountability have no value at all in creationism. It's not just about make-believe, it's about deceiving people. But the reason you get the feeling of bitterness from Matt or from Seth, and you probably get it more from Seth than from Matt. Seth was part of a deeply religious community where everybody he knew and his source of income and everything in his world was part of this deeply religious community for many years. I wasn't that way. I was associating with a lot of different type of people. I mean, with different mindsets. So I was open to a bunch of different things. And of course, Matt was studying to be a minister. So he was all about the philosophy and understanding scripture. And so he feels that he wasted a good deal of his life in that. Actually, I might have wasted mine by just simply having a misspent youth, which I enjoyed very much. So, I mean, when I realized that everything I believed my whole life was wrong, I hadn't invested myself in that lie. So I didn't have to like take off the magic underwear and have one of those coming out things like some other people I know did. I had an advantage there. And so the only thing that I challenge is like, I was never a creationist. I always understood evolution, and I was alone in that until I was like 14. I was 14 years old before I met an other person who even understood what evolution was, much less accepted it. And so you just seeing people misrepresent and mislead to deliberately deceive other people is the thing that motivates me. And so I don't get tired of it. I enjoy what I do.
Right. No, and I enjoy what you do. As an LGBTQ community member, I have grown increasingly concerned about creeping theocracy in recent years. And I think part of it, you're very quick to wake up if you're part of a community that gets targeted by these people. And to have so much, have so many lies and so much disinformation come from a group of people. And when they're talking shit, they're talking about you. You know, when I hear all the bathroom shit and all and marriage equality and everything that comes along with all that, you know, like they're talking about me. They're talking about the people I know and love and my family and, you know, my extended family into my community. So it starts to hit home a lot more. It starts to feel a lot more dangerous. And I know that we could do a whole show on this. And I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole. Can you address the dangers of this creeping theocracy?
There's an awful lot to that. I mean, what my primary concern is not with the LGBT community, though that is valid. I mean, there is an awful lot of hate that they're sharing with you. The bigger issue for me is the stuff that affects everybody. And one of the judgments that I made about not just Christianity, but religion as a whole, and particularly Christianity and Western monotheism, is it seems to be that these religions were designed to avoid responsibility for anything. You know, and Christianity is probably the worst about this, because as long as your imaginary friend understands whatever bullshit excuse is behind whatever dumb thing you did, then obviously Jesus is going to forgive you for everything you've done, right? So you don't have to atone for anything. You don't have to. And I've seen people who have victimized, children or whatever, and they make a statement in public news that Jesus has forgiven them, so they don't need to go to prison for their crime. They don't actually have to serve any punishment for that. They don't have to do any atonement, which is even more important. I don't care if somebody goes to prison, but is there some other way you can make up for this damage that you've done? But they just want to absolve themselves of all responsibility. And this continues into the environment where, that we are supposed to be fruitful and multiply and dominate and subdue the earth because it's given to us to use up all of its resources and bring as many souls as possible unto the Lord. And it doesn't matter if we can't feed all those kids, if they'll all end up starving. And it doesn't matter if we reduce the world to a wasteland, because Jesus is going to come back any minute now and save us from ourselves, and he's going to roast the rest of the planet anyway, so we may as well chew it all up and expend it as it is. Right. That is enormously dangerous. And the believer likes to ask me all the time, what if you're wrong? As if there's a consequence. If I say, so I say that there's no God and I die and there's a God, well, that means I'm going to go to hell. You know what? I'm going to hell, because that guy knew that I'm a rational thinking person. That guy knew everything about what makes me make my decisions, and he's going to judge me and punish me with the things that he made me believe. That's his fault. If there was a God, which of course there isn't, there's absolutely no chance that any of that is true. But just playing hypothetically, were that to happen, no problem. Send my ass to hell like I agreed to do when I was 12.
Mm-hmm.
But when I turn the question on the believer, what if you're wrong? I can't get them to understand that, let's say you care about the environment. Let's say you care about, you know, renewable resources for generations down the road. If Jesus doesn't show up by Thursday, what the hell are we going to do, right? So they say, I'm not wrong. Yes, you are. I'm not wrong. That's it. There's no way to think hypothetically at all. There's no way to examine both sides of this. So I say, okay, what if you took care of the environment? What if you were, you cared about your resources? What if you only had a number of children that you could actually take care of, right? And so when Jesus shows up, we have a functioning planet where everybody's happy and healthy and fed. And it would be a shame that Jesus is going to destroy that. But it's, oh, what the hell? It's your God, and he doesn't show any actual wisdom in your religion anyway. But at least Jesus would have roasted a planet that functioned, where everybody's happy. And if you're wrong, and this is the part they'll never hear, Jesus doesn't show up, and we're all overpopulated in a wasteland where everybody's starving and diseased, well, then what the hell? You know?
Right.
So they tell each other that they can faith heal, and they don't have to get vaccinations because they can pray this shit away. And they've got evangelicals in this country who are saying to people not to get vaccinated because Jesus died on the cross, and so that means you're not going to get measles?
Right.
The hell?
Exactly. Exactly.
I guess the reason that I hate religion is not that I hate God. It's although if God were real, he'd be worthy of hate.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The reason
pure
that I hate the reason I hate religion is because I hate lies.
Yes.
And that's what religion is.
So what would your advice be? And I guarantee you there are some people in my audience that watch this show. I don't have a huge list of subscribers. It's growing, and there are people that tune in. What would your advice be to someone like me who's 75% there with you? What would you say to other people like me or who might be watching this show? How can they apply some critical reasoning and critical analysis to their thought process so that they can more closely examine what they might believe and get closer to truth or reality? Do you have any advice?
The only thing I can say is that it doesn't matter to me what you believe. That's not important. All that matters to me is why you believe it. So if you believe anything that's worthy of discussion, I mean, if you tell me, I believe there are blah, 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 it doesn't matter what the myth is. I don't care. Mm-hmm. But if you say for these reasons, now I'm interested. Okay. What are the reasons that drove you to that conclusion or to that impression, if you will?
Okay.
And that's the biggest problem that I have with Christianity, with Abrahamic religion in general, whether it's Jewish, Muslim, doesn't matter. Right. I've been reading the Quran lately, and the Quran is just like every damn surah is believe or else, believe or you'll go to hell, believe all this nonsense. And that's it. And that's like every freaking chapter. But why would God punish you for what you, not for what you do, but for what you believe? Because the Christian Bible is every bit that bad, right? You can be the most evil person imaginable, but if you believe, then all sins can be forgiven if you but believe. But if you don't believe, then it doesn't matter how good you are, because the only sin that will not be forgiven or that cannot be forgiven is the sin of disbelief. So gullibility is the sole criteria for redemption. And that just tells me that the whole thing's got to be a lie.
Right. No, I agree.
And it qualifies as a lie on other criteria too, because it is dishonest to assert baseless speculation as though it were a matter of fact. And that's what all religions do.
Yes.
And faith is a matter of pretending to know things you don't really know. And that's a lie too. So, as I said at the beginning, all I need is to know that there's not any truth to it. If you can't show me the truth to it, then there is no truth to it. And that's enough. We're done. You know, if you have no reason to believe something, that's a pretty good reason not to believe it. Mm-hmm. But then when we show that in this void of truth, we also find lies as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. How did religion become so dominant over everyone and everything, that it owns and controls everything that we do, especially in the West.
Are you asking me that? Was that rhetorical?
Rhetorically.
Yes. Yeah. No. I get it. And I'm going to shift gears a little bit, only because we're at 15 till the hour, and I promised you we would cap this at an hour. And so I'm just trying to move along, not because that line of conversation isn't interesting, but I just want to hit some different notes.
No, it's your show. Go ahead, please.
Do you think, in your opinion, we know that there are alternate states of consciousness available to us, sleep and dreaming being one of those altered states, maybe even the kind of states of deep sedation that an anesthesiologist can put us into. That's another deeper level of consciousness that we don't typically have direct access to. Do you think we have any, rooted in science, rooted in biology? Some people, like you said, the power of your mind, you can psych yourself out. People have done very painful things to themselves, running needles through their skin, their cheeks, these rituals where they have, put the hooks in their flesh and hung themselves and all this stuff, starved themselves, done all of these things to manipulate their bodies to change their consciousness. Do you think we have any inherent ability to have a physical effect on our health or well-being simply by the power of our mind? And that being maybe even as simple as saying a cancer patient with a good, hopeful attitude may have a better prognosis for recovery than someone who is depressed and has a negative view of their situation. Do you think we carry that?
Okay, well, having no direct medical experience, so we just lay that out to begin with, so that disqualifies much of what I say as speculation. I understand that when you're depressed and you're stressed, that this impedes your body's ability to heal. So of course, if you're happy and you're in a good mood, that gives you a better chance. There's that. But people do go through these rituals of starving themselves and piercing their flesh and fasting or whatever it is that they're trying to do to put their body in a compromised position so that they get the endorphin rush, or that they do something else to whether it's drugs or meditation and sleep deprivation or any of the other things that they want to alter their consciousness because they think that there is another consciousness to get to.
Okay.
And that's the sad thing, that there isn't.
Okay.
I mean, I've noticed that in dreams that I have, when things are going well in my life, I can fly. Mm-hmm. I have other powers too. When I fly, I can fly. I can shoot photon torpedoes from the palms of my hands. I can defeat any foe. All of that when things are going good in my life. And then when things are going bad in my life, and unfortunately this hasn't been the case in a number of years, but I can't fly. There are tornadoes everywhere. I've associated that the presence of tornadoes in my dreams means that my life is not in my control, that I'm subject to other forces. And obviously these are forces of chaos and terror. But that's about all the meaning that my dreams have. And the sad thing is that primitive people had no idea about psychology or psychiatry. They think that these are messages. You noticed that creationists, the religious extremists, and creationism is a form of religious extremism, that there's a correlation with conspiratorial thinking, right? Where you start seeing patterns that don't really exist. Where you start just assuming that in both cases, you think you have knowledge that is beyond what the common person understands, that you've drawn these connections, that you've seen these patterns that nobody else has noticed. It's common for people to think.
No, I didn't mean to step on you. Go ahead.
Well, it's common for people to think that way now in the age of enlightenment in the 21st century. So don't think about going back a couple of thousand years when nobody knew dick about jack. And they think that whatever the hell they see in dreams, and dreams can be enormously imaginative, they think that is communication from the gods. And so they write it down in their books, and now it becomes prophecy.
Do do you think there is any psychological value to doing inner exploration with psychedelics? Do you think that anyone can improve their psychological state, or maybe their perception of the world, or maybe gain a better appreciation for life through psychedelic experiences? For example, when people do psychedelics and have that experience of being interconnected with everything, that's oftentimes transformative for people. And I don't mean that in a religious sense. I just mean maybe in a psychological sense. In your opinion, do those types of experiences hold any value for us, or are they just distractions?
It's hard for me to say. First of all, I don't appreciate drugs myself.
Okay.
So I mean, I've gotten high a handful of times in the entirety of my life. And I don't think once in my adult life, because I'm just not interested. But I know somebody else. I have a close relationship, a familial relationship with a couple that have rejected mainstream Western religion. Technically, they're Hindu, but they're both atheists. They're both unapologetically, absolutely atheist. But they're part of a Hindu sect that imbibe some tea that is essentially DMT.
Okay.
And even though neither one of them believes in anything supernatural, they're all about this tea. And they think that somehow it enhances their consciousness. I don't see it. I don't see how it could be. But I don't have any personal experience with it. And I haven't seen any studies of it. So I've got nothing, let's say, intelligent to say about that.
Okay. That's what I love. I love it when someone can be honest enough to say, I don't know, or I'm not informed enough to give an opinion. Instead of saying some bullshit, you just say what you just said. And I respect you so much for that. And it's a simple thing, but it really makes me respect you. So I just want you to know that. I'm not trying to turn this into some kind of ass kissing thing, but seriously, you're out there doing this work, and you're going toe to toe with a lot of these people. And I don't know. I just appreciate it. We're getting down within. We've got like 8 minutes to go. I just want to hit a couple of other topics, and then I'll take a look and see if there are any questions in the chat room. Because you are a skeptic and you're a man of science, what is your opinion on alien life, or the chances of alien life? And I'll start this by saying I believe that there is a UFO phenomenon, but I don't think we know what it is. I think there's a phenomenon, and I think we don't know what the fuck we're seeing or experiencing. And that's as far as I can go with that. Do you think it's even possible, using logic and reason and science? And I know that statistically, the universe is physically so big that it's virtually assured that there is some form of life out there. But do you think it's possible that we are the only life in the universe, or where do you stand on that?
It is possible that we're the only form of life in the universe, but the probability is ridiculous. Why I balance the Fermi paradox against the Drake equation.
Okay.
And
I know
let's say there's a couple billion stars in our galaxy. Not all of them have planets. Not all of them have planets that are capable of supporting life, because they may be in extreme positions. Not every planet has to be necessarily in the Goldilocks zone. There are other conditions by which a planet could support life, even if it's not in a Goldilocks zone. But let's just stick with what we understand, right? So we have the Goldilocks zone of somewhere between the Earth somewhere between the orbit of Venus and the orbit of Mars, somewhere in there. And both of those, both Venus and Mars, where they constituted a bit differently, they could both support life.
Right.
So the Goldilocks zone is actually quite broad, where religious people will argue otherwise. If you think about the history of this planet, and let's say we've got 4 billion stellar systems that we can be concerned with just in this one galaxy. The Drake equation compares the number of years in the history of our planet to the number of other stars that might have similar planets. And so for 3.5 billion of those planets that have life on them, that life would be microbial, something comparable to bacteria, maybe protists, and that's it. That would be like the most advanced form of life, would be something single-celled. And then for the next 500 million planets after that, roughly, they're all going to be some degree of what we would typically call animals, although they would be, of course, different. You wouldn't have but the last 100 or so, the last 200 on the outside, that would be capable of radio telescopes, that would be capable of sending signals to other planets.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the space involved just within this galaxy, it is as likely that the nearest civilization to our level has sent messages 50 years ago. We haven't got it yet. That's possible. That's actually probable. The messages that we've sent out have only been, or wouldn't have been, received by anything that is less than 100 and what is it, 80? They would have to be closer than 80 light years away to receive a message at all. And then you have attenuation and distortion, because remember the planet Jupiter, when you watch the space on the old-fashioned TV that has a dial, you watch the space between the channels, you get what my friend called the war of the bees, which is just the black and white static.
Mm-hmm.
That is mostly is being generated by Jupiter, because Jupiter generates its own radio waves. So when you go out 80 light years away, and you think about how many other planets like Jupiter and how many other stars, of course, are generating the same thing, you're going to have an awful lot of distortion and an awful lot of attenuation. So this place could have hundreds, or we're going to have billions of inhabited planets, billions of planets with life on them that we'll never hear from. Not every one of those planets, has wiped themselves out shortly after they achieved this level of intelligence. But one of the side effects of this level of intelligence is the ability to destroy ourselves consciously, and not everybody elected a Trump and then went that way, but we would expect that a lot of them did, for whatever reason. And if you're not intelligent about it, maybe you didn't use nuclear warfare. Maybe you didn't deliberately deplete all of your resources just to make a profit in the next fiscal quarter without caring about, without having some religious excuse for how you can get away with doing that. Maybe other organisms, other planets had wiped out their resources through complete ignorance, innocence, and they are no longer able to send messages. So you've got this small window for the civilizations that we're worried about. Is it possible that UFOs have come to this planet? And think about this now, because I always believed that the UFOs are possible, but I actually consider it more likely that if we were ever visited by anybody showing up in a flying saucer, that they were us. It was more likely that it was going to be time travelers than it was from somebody from another planet. Why would, if you're going to another planet, if you found a planet that is evidently inhabited, they're sending out radio waves, we're able to there's an intelligence that's generating this, you're going to send a probe out, and that probe's purpose is to establish communication. Are you going to send a flying saucer who then only singles out the meth addict in a single wide trailer in Arizona just to anally rape him with an electronic probe?
Right.
And then you're going to come back and without telling anybody you're there? I mean,
right.
That's not happening.
I agree.
Now, we have had a number of times that we've had UFO sightings that turned out to be stuff that our own government was doing, like when they're trying to conceal certain aircraft, or other things that they're trying to test out or whatever. And that's what most of it is. I mean, look at the mythology that developed out of Roswell, and it was a damn weather balloon. I mean, have you ever been to Roswell in the summertime?
I've not, but I've heard. I've talked to people who have been.
They have these huge celebrations of this UFO phenomenon every summer. I forget exactly what the date is, but I mean that would actually be a fun time to go there. But they're celebrating a thing that never happened. They're celebrating a weather balloon that came down, and they had this huge exaggeration about it, and that's where all of that came from. And I guess when you put so much stock in how you sensationalized the story, there would be no way you'd ever admit that that's all it ever was.
Right. No, that's a good thought on that. We're at the top of the hour, but I want to and I'm honoring our time limit, but I want to give you a chance to talk about your interest in paleoanthropology and your crowdfunding campaign to help fund the trip to Africa to do the research. Could you just talk about that a little bit? Because I want to give you a fair amount of time to talk about that and put that out there.
Thank you very much. I mean, more so than criticizing creationism, I am fascinated by evolution, and the lessons that I've put out on my videos have gotten some attention among the academic community. So sometimes I will show up to something where the scientists recognize me, and that's always a good thing. And recently, the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, South Africa, reached out to me, asking me to help them fund a paleontological expedition into the Karoo, which is an area of South Africa that has lions and rhinos and all of it's the stereotypical African wilderness, but it's a reserve so that there's like no towns or anything in it. So there's really out in the wilds of Africa. I managed to get, in only about a week or so, I managed to raise the funds that they needed for this expedition. And one of the conditions, one of the things to inspire me to do that was they said, if you raise the funds, we'll take you with us. I am going to Africa in February of 2020. I will spend 2 weeks in the remote areas where there probably isn't going to be a cell signal, but there will be lions. And I'm going to be exploring my favorite geological period. That's the Permian. And in previous expeditions into this area, most of the Permian therapsids we know about in the world have come from this area. And I've been told by the scientists who were there before, they said every time they go that each of the people, each of the people that I was able to talk to have all found their own unique original species. And so there's a realistic, even a good possibility that I will discover a species as yet unknown to science. And I'm very excited about that.
No, it's exciting work. I think it's fascinating.
I love the Permian above the age of dinosaurs. I don't want to go into all the details why that is. I'm enormously happy that I'm able to do what I do. And I depend on Patreon. And I saw somebody today that I never heard of before. He was talking about how he's at a danger level in his Patreon because he has 5 more patrons than I do, and he said he wasn't able to sustain himself. I'm like, dude, you got 5 more than I do, and he doesn't do anything, so far as I can tell. I mean, he just shows up and talks. I have to do a lot of research. I have to do a lot of editing. Everything that I do has an awful lot of prep work in it, and I have less than 800 patrons. So if anybody wants to please support my work, please, I need all the help I can get. That would be patreon.com/ARONRA. Hopefully you'll have the link down here. So
yes, we will.
Yeah. So I've been doing this for 4 years now. And the thing that I'm really happy about is that the more that I do, the more that it seems that I can do. And while our situation certainly with secular politics and science education and everything else we got going on, it does seem like we're retreating backward into the flood and trying to claw our way out of the mud. I really feel like that sometimes, but that also makes activists like myself even all the more necessary. And we are having some impact, although it doesn't show very evidently right now. the polarizing condition that we have right now is making activists like myself even more necessary.
No, I agree. I appreciate so much you coming on here. I hope that you will grace this show again and come back, because we kind of just scratched the surface on some stuff. And I am looking back. I just want to do some shout outs to Anya, Vanessa, Sherry, Out of Mind again. As expected, Aron, you ruffled some feathers in the chat room. I know someone got a little defensive saying that not all UFO experiencers are meth heads in a trailer, which is, it's okay. Like, I get it. And I just want you to know that, at least for myself, that I am doing my best to approach this stuff with intellectual honesty, and
I should throw out there,
not perpetuate charlatan.
I should also throw out there that I not meaning to be as insolitary as I was, but I lived in many single wide trailers out in the middle of the desert myself.
Yeah.
So.
Right. No, I get it. So please know that you're welcome to come back, and I would love it. And if you would, hang on after I stop the show. I just want to chat with you for a second, and I'll let you go. And so at this time, of course, I'm going to do what I always do. I'm going to hit what I call the happy music. And as I scan through here, Cafe in the chat room, Out of Mind, who said TR3B. I don't know what the hell we're supposed to prove with TR3B, even though it's a favorite topic of mine. This was interesting. This was thought-provoking, and I think that even though there's a lot of us that are still flirting with the woo-woo and hanging on to some of it, I think it's varying degrees, and I think we all need to exercise healthy skepticism. And we all also owe it to ourselves and each other to admit that all of this stuff could be wrong, and that we could be wrong about it. And,
is it possible? I don't mean to alter your format, but I did notice somebody says that I should answer the questions in the chat room. Do we have a list of questions?
I got. Let's see. We're not simply.
I hope I didn't like.
Oh, no. I was trying to respect your time. And so that's why I know I said I would go there. I didn't see a lot of properly formed questions. I saw a lot of commentary, but I didn't see straight up questions. I do see Terrence McKenna thought that there may be people out there who had a DMT trip and mistook the experience for UFO encounter. There's a lot of commentary, but there wasn't a lot of straight up questions. So if we do this again, I would just ask my audience to formulate straight up questions in all caps that I can read and give to Aron. And so Aron, thank you for doing what you do, and thank you for coming on a show like this. I'm glad that you probably took a look at my channel and looked at some of the topics and maybe even some of the guests, and you thought, what the fuck? But but even as the person who conceived of this show, I think it's critically important to have you on and to have the atheist point of view presented in a fair light, and that we all stop, those of us in this on the woo-woo side of this stuff, stop and really think about what we're investing our time and energy and intellectual energy into. So I don't know. This is just an attempt on my part to do the right thing and to not be a person that just perpetuates some untrue bullshit. And I'm struggling with that. That struggle is ongoing. So thank you, Aron, for having patience with me in that matter.
No worries. No judgment.
All right. Thank you so much. I already played the happy music. Thank you so much. I'm not quite sure what I'm doing tomorrow night, but I will be here tomorrow night. Same bat time, same bat channel. Thank you all for being here. We got to do this again. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Have a good weekend and be safe out there. Goodbye.